Next, I'm moving on to the creative genius. Okay, I feel like I've talked about the creative genius a lot in the past, whatever many number of years. And I always start by talking about Elizabeth Gilbert, who I think Lauren Larkin just shared her TED Talk. Because I saw this TED Talk, this was years ago, and she pointed out that a genius was not a person, that back in Roman times, a genius was something that an artist or a poet had. Like, they could hear this guiding spirit, like, in the walls, and then could, like, relay the messages through their art and their poetry. And realizing that the original definition of a genius was not an individual, like, I'm a genius. It's like, no, I have a genius. And it really changed how I thought about myself and my art completely. Because I always felt like that I couldn't always take credit for things that I made, because a lot of times it just felt like this accident, or like, I don't know. And also I felt like that it puts a lot of pressure on the artist. So having this other, artner in the studio, having a genius there, realizing that, oh, this is a spirit that is connecting me to where the ideas come from, which I'm not here to tell you what that is, because I feel like that depends on, your philosophy of life. But I know that the ideas are alive. And then my genius is my connector. And it's like the word genie, like they are like helping us manifest things that don't exist in reality, which is really magical. So once I learned that a genius was not a person, that it was actually a spirit, I was like, I knew it wasn't all me. And it also is so helpful because it takes off the pressure of the ego, but also now I have another person to talk to in the studio. Because I talk to Coco sometimes, and I do talk to my genius sometimes. And a genius, you might also consider it your muse, or a guardian angel, or a guiding light, or your genie, or an imaginary friend. So my personal theory about the creative genius is that I think that every kid is born with a genius. I think it's our connection to the thing that's bigger than us. And that kids, like, when they're playing by themselves, like, who are they talking to? I feel like every kid is born with a little genius. And it's, as they're growing up and in school, I feel like that in our effort to grow up, a lot of us push our genius away. So I noticed as a teacher that one reason I really like teaching middle school is because that was the time where I feel like kids lose their genius. Sometimes they lose them earlier, which is really sad. But I definitely pushed my genius away after middle school, because I was like, I have to be an adult now. Because also I didn't know it was my genius. I really thought I was crazy for a long time, until I learned about that the genius was the separate entity. And so, yeah, I was like, oh, I'm not crazy, and I'm not alone in the studio. And it really helps me a lot, because using our imagination to enlist different magical helpers is to help us not feel so isolated and alone. Because especially if you were working by yourself, there's a lot, you can get into some other negative self-talk. So that's why if I have other things to talk to, like if I have, like Rory's here, sometimes I'll talk to Rory. So talking to other things and music help me counteract the negative thinking, like the obsessing, like taking over, because I'm just trying to take charge of the record player in my head, and using everything I can. So my genius is named Jean. Genie. Let's see. I draw Jean in the book as this sort of as this yellow light, this sort of spot color. So this is a scene where, wait, let me scroll down and make sure that you guys can see this. So I draw it as like this little sort of shooting star. It's like, inspiring her here and encouraging her to create her art, and here her matter is like, ugh. Because if I'm talking to my genius, I'm not talking to my matter, because I'm choosing which voice I'm listening to. So actually here, Mona shoves her matter like in a jar of ink and is using it to paint. And is instead like listening to her genius instead of her matter. So yeah, I don't get too much into the genius in the book, but I really wanted to put it in there because it's part of my magic healing medicine of what's helped me. When I was a kid, my genius looked like Garfield, for sure, because I was really into Garfield. In my head, I see Jean as this rainbow star. I don't have, like, I was going to make a puppet, but I ran out of time. But he looks like this sort of rainbow star, almost like from Mario Kart. It's sort of like, meh, if that, I think that makes sense. And here's another, I don't have like the best picture of Jean, but here's a great example of me drawing. This was a proposal for Sketchbook Dares like long ago, where Jean is shining a light on my inner critics here. Because this is also part of what my genius does, is it helps me combat all the negative voices in my head. And I feel like that I have an ally, and I have like a cheerleader, and it's surprisingly helpful in the studio, even though it's all in my head. Because also, stuff that you think about in your head, it does register in your brain as real as stuff that's outside. So it's actually not too bonkers to use your imagination to help you in this way. So actually, I want to dare you all to draw your creative genius. So mine, looks like a rainbow star, but also I think it's looked like a cat in the past. So you can do it on paper, but a lot of times when I've taught this activity to draw your genius, I have people draw on mirror, because I like the idea of like drawing what you see in the mirror that is invisible to the naked eye, but you feel like is there. So one woman, she drew this sort of like sailor guy, that this is her genius. She's like, yeah, he's been my genius since I was a teenager. Like this character. Yeah, it's hard to photograph mirrors, it turns out. But then of course, like, here's another example, because maybe it's drawing your genius, but maybe it's drawing you and your genius. So here we have a magical cat, which I love. So there's different ways to approach how you want to represent your genius. Maybe you guys are interacting, maybe you're at your desk and they're like talking to you. And if you're not sure what your genius looks like, okay, I have some encouraging prompts. Okay, so if you're not sure, think about your childhood toys and think about the things that you loved to draw as a kid. Like, were you doodling flowers? Were you doodling floating eyeballs? Like, were you doodling robots? Tapping into, I think, the childhood connection with creativity and that original spark and passion, I think, is the best way to sort of tap into that genius. Even using, like, kids' art materials. And also you could think about your spirit animal or a beloved pet. So I feel like animals are really good, just like with the assistant. Animals really, I think, help unlock magical thinking. And maybe it is a genius or a muse or a mermaid or, I don't know, another magical creature like a unicorn. So yeah, I feel like there's a lot of different directions, and honestly, like, it's whatever you make it out to be, because maybe it's not a specific character, maybe it's just a shape, like a little star in Mona. Okay, and when working on drawing out your genius, I challenge you to also think about what their personality is, because I think that it's a good way to sort of gauge even what your relationship is with your creative process. So what are their strengths and weaknesses? Are they playful? Are they serious? Are they nice to you? Are they in need of music? Like, I need music to work, so I'm always like, Gene needs a soundtrack. Because when I transition from administrative work to creative work, in that 30-minute puttering period, part of what I'm doing is setting up the table for myself, but also I feel like I'm summoning Gene. Like, I need to create a party. I need to create, like, this sort of conducive environment for some fun creativity to happen. You know, it's like, okay, I gotta get the right music on, because Gene likes music, and I need, like, my hot beverage and my cold beverage, and maybe light some incense. And it's almost like I'm sort of summoning, like, hey, Gene, come on, come play with me. So that's what I always feel like that puttering period is. It's like sort of creating, I don't know, some good energy going. So it's like, come on in and, you know, and let's see. Oh, and if you wanted to try drawing your genius on a mirror, which is really fun, you could use lipstick. Because I just also like drawing on mirror because then you can sort of like get in your drawing. But you can also use China markers, like these wax crayons, because they're used for writing on china and ceramics. They're the kind, you know, with like the string you peel off and it gets everywhere. So yeah, so if you have any of these lying around, you can try. Just as, you know, one way to draw your genius. And yeah, let's see. I don't see any other questions. So cool. Well, I'm gonna keep on going.